Right now, Obama's trifecta of scandals and political headaches. How did he get here? And how can he, if he can, move forward? And next,
I knew I'd kill myself.
Sexual assault in the military. We have our shocking interview with a retired Navy lieutenant who was one of the central figures in the tail hook scandal in the early 90s. She's speaking out now as we're stunned by some of the sexual assault numbers coming out of the military of today's Army. We'll have that as the issue is coming out of the shadows. And later, Christie. He appears prominently in the Garden State's new tourism ad. And by the way, it's just in the middle of a political campaign. For some, it doesn't feel right. For some, it's business as usual. What do you think? Is this an ad for Christie or is it an ad for Jersey? Good evening, everybody, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. Thanks so much for joining us this Thursday evening, May 16th. This has not been a good couple weeks, to put it mildly, for the president or his administration. First, there were the questions about the administration's handling of Benghazi, questions we thought were asked and answered during the campaign, but have come front and center again. Then there were the allegations that the IRS targeting conservative groups, and these times they didn't just seem conspiratorial, they seemed very real. Associated Press says that the feds were snooping into their news organization's records without prior notice, and all the media is up in arms on that one. We're going to have all those issues that have converged in the last 48 hours, and maybe even now there could be a fourth scandal. We'll talk about more over the course of this hour. Now, yesterday, the White House finally gave into not only Republican demands, but also pleas from folks within their own party to get ahead of this, and they released the emails that were exchanged between officials in the days after the Benghazi attack. Now, the emails show that the talking points underwent 12 revisions, and many of the changes were made after the State Department expressed concerns. The edits removed references to an al-Qaeda affiliate, as well as references to previous CIA warnings about terror threats in Benghazi. Also yesterday, congressional Republicans at a hearing with the Attorney General Eric Holder explored a range of Obama administration controversies. Holder apparently growing very annoyed with more than just one of them, and especially in particular Congressman Darrell Issa.
It's inappropriate and it's too consistent with the way in which you conduct yourself as a member of Congress. It's unacceptable and it's shameful.
Now then, last night, the president, as many of you saw, holding a press conference to announce that he accepted the resignation of the IRS Commissioner. But let's be clear, accepting the resignation means, in Washington speak, he fired him. But that in itself has not satisfied Republicans, who made it clear this morning that they are not going to be dropping this issue.
The power to tax is the power to destroy.
There's something profoundly un-American about targeting your political opponents.
And then, midday today, the president held a joint news conference with the Turkish Prime Minister, but frankly, nobody was really paying attention as to the relations between the two nations. All the focus was on the trifecta of scandals we just discussed. Take a listen.
And I've directed the Defense Department to ensure that our military can respond lightning quick in times of crisis. But we're not going to be able to do this alone. We're going to need Congress as a partner. Leaks related to national security can put people at risk. They can put men and women in uniform that I've sent into the battlefield at risk. They can put some of our intelligence officers who are in various dangerous situations that are easily compromised at risk. I make no apologies, and I don't think the American people would expect me as Commander-in-Chief not to be concerned about information that might compromise their missions or might get them killed. I certainly did not know anything about the IG report before the IG report had been leaked through press, but what I'm absolutely certain of is that the actions that were described in that IG report are unacceptable.
The last reference there, talking about the IRS scandal here, where they seem to target Tea Party groups and conservative groups seeking nonprofit status. All right, let's bring in our panel on this. We've got Jeannie Zaino, political science professor at Iona College, Dominic Carter, political journalist, author, and senior political correspondent Andrew Whitman. All right, guys, I think we'd all agree that in isolation, each of these issues would be a problem, maybe even a headache, but they would be a day, 2-day, 3-day story. But when you put them together, it speaks to the narrative that conservatives argued before the election, really for the first 4+ years of this administration, that this is a president hell-bent on big government here and government overreach. These are the dangers and the perils if you give too much power to one president. The president has always said and really made the point that if he got elected, re-elected, that he was going to try and use government for the betterment of society. That argument that he has, he's got a tough time holding up this week after what we saw. Jeannie, it seems that this is the moment his conservative critics has been waiting for, this kind of conflagration of a lot of problems all at the same time.
Yeah, and I think you just touched on the biggest problem for the president is that the idea that government is ineffective. You know, so many Republicans are saying, you know, this is corruption, goes to the highest levels. We haven't seen that yet. The president hasn't been connected to any of these three quote-unquote scandals. But what we can say is that you've got a government that's been ineffective at the very least. And that for the president is a problem as we look at the introduction of big things like health care. Sure. Who wants to trust the Treasury Department now to run their health care for them? I mean, these are big problems that strike at the heart of Obama's philosophy and his approach to government.
For example, about resurrecting gun control as it relates to background checks.
Absolutely.
Think about the headache and this headwind that would run into, let alone immigration reform. All these big ideas. And do you
trust the government to make sure that you are able to retain your Second Amendment rights? Look, reporters feel like they haven't been able to retain their First Amendment rights. I mean, this strikes at the heart of so many of the president's approaches to governing that's the real problem for him. They haven't touched him directly, but this is a problem as it pertains to his governing style and what he believes the government should do. And quite frankly, it's going to make him very hard to make it very hard for him to move forward in this second term. You
know, Dominic, it seems that while there's a trifecta of scandals, there's also a trifecta of the stakeholders in Washington, where Republicans, they've been waiting for 5 years for this, okay? But Democrats who feel that this president has kept them at arm's length, hasn't gone out of his way to help any of them, hasn't done any of the retail politics that they thought he would do here, they're not jumping up on any soapboxes standing up for the administration. And finally, the press, with this AP story, none of them. And while the public may not care that much about the AP story, at least some people in the public, the press are united in this front here, that this was heavy-handed by the administration. So you put all these things together, very few people are speaking up in the president's corner. Even some of the folks from his first-term administration have been really critical of their handling the last week or so.
The president's got a problem. There's no other way to say this. And that lame duck status that we talk about just about every other night, it may be kicking in right about now. This president has real problems. Those critics, they have been searching from day one to almost overturn the will of the people that elected him, from my point of view. But he's played right into their hands now. And for the president,
the response to it
that's
too, right?
exactly where I was going, Richard. We're on the same page. For the president of the United States to stand up there and say, "Well, you know, I was watching the 6 o'clock news." That's unacceptable.
And Monday to say,
Mr. President, this is your administration.
Yeah. He was a day late to this. It was more than but certainly a day late. On Monday, his response compared to what he did Tuesday. And then for people who follow this, he's already said that he's going to pass a reporter's shield. Something, by the way, I know this is inside baseball, but that New York's own Senator Schumer said back in 2009, he didn't get resistance from Republicans. The White House was the one who wouldn't do it. If they just passed what they tried to do, this story could never have happened. Now he's doing it. Turn over the emails on Benghazi. So they're already admitting, even if they're saying that there's no there, he's already capitulated to what they demanded. And then finally on the IRS, fires the chief. This thing's going forward. There may even be an independent prosecutor. Now, Andrew, people say second-term curse here. As much as I think the administration screwed this up, I think a little context wouldn't hurt. Reagan, Iran-Contra. Obviously, you go back to Watergate for the mother of all scandals here when you go to Nixon. But even after that, you got Clinton, obviously, with the Lewinsky scandal. You had, as it related to certainly Bush here in terms of some of the problems, obviously, related to the war that never got through, et cetera. None of these scandals at this point touch the administration or the president directly, that he was doing these for political gain. I haven't heard anybody say that the IRS scandal, while it was certainly politically tinged, at least it looks like it could be at this point, went to the desk of the president. It's on his watch, it's his administration. But at the end of the day, he may get by this because this wasn't happening with his fingerprints or his directives.
Well, yeah. I mean, you talk about the scandals of these second-term presidents, from Watergate to, to Iran-Contra, to Lewinsky, to the worm turning on Iraq and Afghanistan. And then you've got these things, which are significantly less substantive, significantly less critical, and significantly with fewer presidential fingerprints on it. But I got to say, I think we may be jumping here on the motion of the news cycle here. I mean, that the president wasn't ahead of these stories the day after the story broke. I mean, Politico, we ran the quote about Politico talking about how he may have lost the media. This morning, Politico was running a story about how it was a measure twice, cut once approach at the White House, where he was making sure that he was firming up his support. That's the quote from yesterday in Politico. The quote today from Politico was a measured response to try to stem some of the criticism. So,
but Andrew, there is a consensus out there from people who follow the inside baseball of it and people who just tune in if they're lucky 5 minutes evening news. This administration doesn't have its act together. And whatever.
I'm not so sure about that. And
you're the expert when it comes to polls. Last week or 2 weeks ago, he was, I think, a 51% approval rating. Kind of a norm for a second term, at least where he is, maybe even a little bit better than the historical average. The next poll that comes out, you think he's in the 40s and maybe even in the lower part?
I think he'll drop. I don't know if he'll go as far down as the lower 40s, but I disagree with Andrew to this extent. I do think that when you consider, I agree with you that the little scandals themselves aren't maybe as dramatic as some of the ones we've seen, but when they make governing and policy making hard, when they make it difficult for you to achieve your agenda, which this is going to do for the president, immigration, gun reform, those are the two keys that he wants to get past.
For his
but no, but this gives an excuse.
Richard, I disagree with all of you. These are not little scandals. Benghazi,
No, I agree with you.
Benghazi is not a little scandal.
No,
the IRS is not a little scandal.
You're right.
And the journalists, I mean, this president is doing things, this administration is doing things that if President Bush done,
we'd go crazy.
We'd go absolutely batty.
No, you're right about that. Yeah,
these are not little scandals. They're all major ones. And it's all on this president's watch, and he's dropping the ball, and his poll numbers will go to the low 40s, if not lower.
And I think just on this point, if we're fair, if the Bush administration, if the IRS under the Bush administration had targeted progressive groups here and denied them nonprofit status and put in key search terms, progressive or anything else, we would be going cartwheels on the show, going crazy on it. And then, God forbid here, on the AP story, remember what we did with Valerie Plame? They're not the same story? Remember how we were talking about that this is enemies list or whatever else here? I'm with you. This is a problem. I don't know if the president deserves all the blame for it, but he's going to get it anyway. So when we come back here, the question becomes, Dominic said it's getting late already in the second term, to quote Yogi Berra. What can the president do? And he's got a big idea in terms of what his second term was all about and what he thought November was all about. Can he turn it around? And if he is gonna, how's he gonna do it? We're gonna talk about the second term blues and if there is a chance for a 180. Stay with us.